Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Giora Engel, co-founder and CEO of Neosec. Neosec is reinventing application security and is the intelligent way to protect your APIs from business abuse and data theft. Giora, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Like we were talking about before the show, so fascinated as technology is expanding and growing and people are using different pieces of technology to plug into one another. And this whole idea about security around the APIs that you build with technology is so fascinating because I think it's something we take for granted. It's like using these tools and all these features and accessories, but making sure that, we understand the protection we need behind them. So I'm really excited to dive into that topic and your background. But before we get into all of that, tell us a little bit about what are some of the craziest or maybe the most recent attacks that left an impact on you and the business.
We all see security attacks in the news, and every company today exposes their core business to the outside as part of their business process. I mean, there's really no other way to do business today. I mean, even if you're in healthcare, even if you're in any type of business, everything needs to be exposed to your end users, to your end customer, their partner through web applications and different types of integrations. So most of the attacks that we see today are actually attacks on these types of infrastructure. And I think, what's most shocking is that how it changed over the course of, let's say, 5 years or so. If you asked me 5 years ago, most of the attacks would be more infrastructure attacks, like people would compromise an employee endpoint and try to do some lateral movement and all of that. I mean, we all spoke about APTs at the time, and all of a sudden everything changed and everything is directly on the application framework. So recently we heard T-Mobile, we heard PayPal, we heard all the big names kind of repeat themselves. Almost every year they have a new attack. And another thing that is also shocking, but actually less known, I think, and that's kind of related to our space. A lot of attacks are actually not published, meaning that today it's not necessarily you have a big breach or no breach. There are many cases where people abuse your infrastructure or maybe steal a smaller number of records, and then you're not obligated to report it. So we also see a lot of that.
Wow, it's incredible to hear about the evolution of the cybersecurity attacks and how it was infrastructure, kind of now it's built into the application framework. And how is it built in? Is it built into the code that's then integrated into your platform or your system, or is it a little bit more sophisticated? And is it an equal amount of threat to you as a company, or is it a little bit more manageable?
I think today every business is a digital business in a sense. And I think people need to think about security differently. I mean, security in the past was more related to the infrastructure. It was more about your data center, your employees' devices, and so on. And that is still important, even though data centers are not really a common thing anymore. We have some legacy data centers, but I know people don't deploy new things in data centers. And all of a sudden, the most of your infrastructure today is actually typically in the cloud, and it's typically in the form of microservices and an application that you build. Now, it's interesting because it's no longer just securing the pipes and the servers and so on. It's really securing your business directly because these applications are really the business itself. So a lot of security teams need to reinvent themselves because they were used to focusing on infrastructure and they have maybe more experience there. But really what's required today is to focus on the business applications. Now, I think with these challenges, I mean, on one hand, there is a lot of opportunity to build a digital business on every industry. And naturally, there is more security challenge, but security is very different than it used to be. I mean, people don't wait for the security team anymore. People build these applications because that's the core business. And the security team needs to find a way to protect the business.
Yeah, it is when we're thinking about security and we're thinking about, you talked about security team kind of needing to help create the I guess maybe it's boundaries or maybe it's infrastructure needed to reduce the amount of threat. Are people moving too fast? Is security teams needing a longer time to integrate the technology needed to keep things safe? Or is there a solution out there that essentially, I guess, speed up the process to create a more secure infrastructure than to build these applications on? Where I'm currently at and where does Neosec kind of come into place?
So first of all, people are moving fast and nothing is going to change that. I mean, I wouldn't say too fast. I think they're moving as fast as the business, and they have to. I mean, there's no other option. First, you need to build your business. Then you need to also think about security, but building the next product capability is always the important thing for any company. And in order to cope with it, I mean, the security teams need to have a different approach. Instead of being the gate and kind of blocking the process or stopping the process, they can't do that anymore. It's not relevant. They also don't want to be in that position. They need to find another way to do it. And it really starts with, first it starts with the visibility, like a lot of other security problems. And this is also where we can start to help. I mean, it starts with being able to see all these APIs that you're exposed to the outside, all the different interfaces and so on, then finding vulnerabilities on these interfaces. And lastly, making sure that the use of these APIs from all these external parties and even internal parties, that use is done correctly and not really in a way that abuses the system or causes data to go out and so on. But I think the basic thing is to understand that the new business is actually, new digital business always exposes itself to the outside. It's part of, like it's an inherent part of the business. So we're not going to stop that, but we do need to be able to see what's going on and to protect that. Just maybe adding two more words about APIs. APIs are kind of the new network, so to speak. So APIs kind of connect between microservices internally, and also enable external parties to connect to your services, either through a browser or web application or mobile application or directly in a machine-to-machine type of thing. So at the end of the day, I mean, these APIs are the new network. And again, it's on one hand challenging because there's so many of them and they develop so fast. But it's also an opportunity because they're much more standard than the way that we used to do connectivity in the past. And there's a huge opportunity here to that visibility gap.
Yeah. And what are some of the negative consequences to, you mentioned earlier that there might be some small amount of files that are being breached or being stolen. Is it more so of a ransomware play, or people actually taking, say, I guess from an end user standpoint, identity pieces of information or financial pieces of information? What are some of the negative consequences to have APIs that have been vulnerable or have been accessed?
So it's not like ransomware, and I'll explain why. So ransomware is an attack that shouldn't be there anymore. I mean, it's only there still because people are not using the infrastructure correctly. It's there because people have local files on their machines. They have like local servers. This is really a thing of the past. There, unfortunately, a lot of organizations that still have that because of whatever legacy system that they have. So they definitely need to look out. But this is really an attack of the past. We're not going to see that type of attack rising in the future because it's just not relevant. Like if you're using modern infrastructure, you don't have that problem.
Yeah.
Instead, these APIs are actually the core business. I mean, if ransomware is trying to attack your computers, your servers, your infrastructure in a sense, imagine something that is far worse. I mean, you have your core application, all the patient data for an insurance company or the insurance claims and financial transactions, like really the core business itself. And these APIs, these interfaces that handle the data, can actually move money from one account to the other. They can file claims. They can create all sorts of things that are the business itself. Now imagine that those things that you have to expose to the outside. What happens if they are abused? And then basically what you imagine there is every business's risk today. So this is really the key to understanding why API security is important and what type of risk there is in exposing these services. The risk is really the very business itself. I mean, that's really the core of what you do as a company. And therefore, every company should think about what would happen if these interfaces are used incorrectly, if there's some kind of vulnerability, if somebody steals your partner's credentials to these services, what happens to you and your clients at the end of the day? And the answer to that is far more than just deleting your files or something like an infrastructure thing. Like it's typically something much more significant. I mean, it would be a lot of lost PII, money movement. Maybe somebody can actually steal money from you that way. But it can be a compliance issue. It can be a regulatory issue, and so on. So I think that's the big difference between application security and a lot of like older infrastructure security that again is still relevant today. But the big change, the big growth from a threat perspective is really on the application side.
Yeah. How did you get started in cybersecurity?
Yeah, so I actually started in the army. I was kind of more on the other side of the game. And back then, I didn't even think that cyber attacks are going to be something that is discussed or relevant for the industry. I think it used to be more of a nation state type of thing for securing your infrastructure and so on. Then in 2011, I started my first cybersecurity company, which was called LightCyber. LightCyber was the first XDR. It combined NDR with EDR together and created basically the first XDR. The concept there was very similar, but at the time, attacks were really more like infrastructure attacks. Attackers were aiming to compromise employee devices like your laptop, and through there get into the data center, get into the internal corporate network, and so on. And we would find the attackers as they operate inside the network by observing the behavior. Today, I mean that kind of led me to what I'm doing today. So after my previous company got acquired, and I was at Palo Alto Networks for 3 years, I saw a completely new problem that was not addressed by any of the big security companies, and that was in application security, because I noticed that all of a sudden more and more attacks are actually on the application environments rather than the infrastructure or data centers. And interestingly, most of the security companies are actually not dealing with application security at all. It's more of an infrastructure play for most of the security companies. And I think today the focus has shifted to the application environments for sure. So cloud security, application security is really where things happen.
Yeah. It's wild to see the shift in the environment, and even that much more, I think, at least for a company standpoint, frightening that there's not a lot of players in the space helping with the protection of those. But the fact that there is a little bit more exciting in kind of the advancement of the technology. And it seems like there's always this push and pull with the people who are attacking. And I know nowadays they're set up as almost companies themselves in terms of the type of information that they extract, how dated these efforts are to get into, whether it's one shape or form of cybersecurity attacks. But kind of thinking about back to, I know at LightCyber, you were acquired by Palo Alto Networks, and I'm always curious about the acquisition process, not going through one myself, but talked to a bunch of founders who've gone through a bunch of acqui-hires and going through this transition. What ultimately made you decide to go with an acquirer like Palo Alto Networks? And what did you kind of learn from the transition and working with them that you've taken, and maybe it's a structural thing, maybe it's strategy, who knows? But what have you taken, extracted, and used at Neosec from that experience?
Oh, a lot of things. So first, telling your company is not what we intended to do typically, but sometimes there's a good match. And I think when at the time for LightCyber, we found that we have kind of a glass ceiling at some point. We were actually growing pretty nicely. We raised just another round of funding at the time. And we were not like in a stressed position or anything like that. And we noticed that over time it becomes harder and harder to grow. And part of the reason is that we were, because we started as an NDR, we started as a network monitoring technology. We always had to deploy or install within the data center, kind of close to the switch, close to the packets. And deploying devices became less and less popular in these years. I mean, it was super popular as the company grew. And then over time, companies like FireEye and others were not succeeding to grow anymore. So that was kind of an inflection point. And that was kind of inherent in our technology. There was no other way to do it. We have to see the packets in the network. And I think the combination with Palo Alto Networks and the promise of using their existing devices that were the firewall and getting the telemetry from them. So by that to avoid that big obstacle for the growth of the technology. So that made a ton of sense. And because of that, I think it made sense to go there and basically build a much bigger product line based on the technology and based on all the know-how, but implemented in a different way. So we transitioned. Yeah. So that's the kind of the second part of your question. What did you learn? So many different things. Palo Alto Networks is an amazing company at home. But one thing that is kind of related to the product and maybe interesting for the audience, we were trying to basically transition our technology from a software technology that can be deployed on-prem or in a virtual machine, whatever form, into a SaaS technology that can work as a service from cloud and based on devices that are already deployed in the field and can send telemetry. And that was actually much harder than we thought. We thought that building a tax service is just, we could just lift and shift the software and make it into SaaS. Of course, I mean, there's some complications and so on. But we thought that would be the fastest path. Then we realized that it's actually not the fastest. In order to really deliver a SaaS service at scale, today the product line in Palo Alto Networks has a huge scale and huge customer base. And in order to do that, you need to really build it differently. The architecture needs to be different, and there are really no shortcuts. You can't just take software and make it SaaS in a scalable way. So that learning we implemented in Neosec. In Neosec, we realized that protecting APIs is definitely something that needs to be provided as a service, because practically all these APIs that people expose to the outside are based in public cloud. I mean, it's all new modern architecture for the most. And we decided in a very, very early stage to be 100% SaaS. There's a component that kind of collect data on the customer side, but then all the analytics happen in SaaS. And that is one of the most important decisions that we made, because it enables us to do things differently and build things in a much more scalable way.
Yeah, it's incredible to hear about the learning of not only launching different product lines, but how to scale them. And what do you think is the most important piece, or one of the two most important pieces when you're thinking about launching a kind of more distributed product line, and also turning a service into a SaaS service that wasn't inherently so? Is there something that you had to consider that you didn't consider until you got into it, that you could get it or advise other founders on what to kind of focus on as they look to transition their products and from one form to another? What in particular kind of brings to mind if you have any advice?
I would say maybe master is kind of unexpected, because I don't think you can really transition. I mean, we could only make that transition from LightCyber to Palo Alto Networks because we were acquired and we could take the product off the market for a while.
Yeah.
I think in practice, companies cannot create transition, unfortunately. By the way, even big companies, like let's say you build a great product and have a public company event, and now the time to change and you need to change it to SaaS, it's really, really hard. You're never going to you're never going to make that transition completely. You're going to have maybe a half service and it's going to have some SaaS qualities, but it's never going to be like a native SaaS offering. The reason is actually more than the technology. In order to be a SaaS company, you need like every process in the company to be different. It starts from the licensing and order fulfillment and support. Instead of support in SaaS, we typically have customer success and of course the development lifecycle. I mean, when you develop software, we typically have more of a waterfall process, and it can be more agile or less agile. But at the end of the day, I mean, there's the development lifecycle. There's some QA. You bring it to production and so on, and kind of iterate on new versions. And then, of course, you need to maintain older versions and so on. When you build SaaS, you can actually build a completely continuous process, like a CI/CD. That is much more, but that requires the whole process to be different. QA is different, DevOps is different. And it's really hard. I mean, once you have that, it's like a certain DNA to your company and people that you hired and so on, but not only the people, even like the culture and DNA of how you do things. It's just important. It's like it's impossible to change it over time. Even if the original people are no longer there, some people come and go, but the core of it is still the same. So this is why I think it's really impossible to change the transition like that. So my lesson is you have to start in the right way. You can't assume that you're going to have different types of product that are different in their architecture, or maybe two flavors of them. It doesn't really work. Either your software or your SaaS, you have that type of customer success process, or you have another. It's very, very different.
That's such a great piece of advice. And I can see the different environments and how the development process is so different. And like you said, you have to build it from the ground up. That's the only way it's going to run at an efficient speed, or else it sounds like the transition is fairly difficult in terms of reinventing the team and kind of reestablishing the focus and the development process overall. Tell us a little bit about Neosec. Tell us a little bit about the current traction. What was exciting about last year's growth? What are you excited about this year's growth? What are some of the cool new things that you're rolling out? If you have any numbers, we'd love to hear. As founders ourselves, we always get excited with numbers.
Yeah, so now Neosec, we launched the product in late 2021, and I think API security is one of the hottest topics in security. So even though 2022 was a generally tough year for the market, this is one of the topics that is growing very, very fast. I think probably faster than any other security topic in the past, but it feels like every year things kind of move faster than the previous year in general. Not just in our topic. It's just like the more transformation, the more digital transformation people are doing, the faster things move.
Yeah.
So that was definitely a very exciting year for us. We got a lot of great recognition. We were presenting on the RSA Innovation Summit. We were selected by Gartner as a cool vendor. We had a lot of different types of coverage and so on. We built amazing relationships with partners, both tech alliances as well as channel partners. We have some of them that do a lot of work for us. Then this is really the key to grow in the end of the day. So I mean, that a lot of different fronts, and I think it's exciting for us to be in a place where what we do is becoming a category. We're not the only ones there. I mean, we have competition, and that's actually good because it means that people have the need. People need to create that budget, to spend that budget. This is really what gets us excited. And of course, we have our own differentiation on our approach that is different than the others.
Yeah. And what are some of the biggest challenges that Neosec faces today?
Well, I mean, for a startup, there are always a lot of challenges. Everything that you do is not straightforward. Otherwise, it would be obvious. So naturally, a lot of different things. I mean, it starts from the way that you expand your business to new territories, and there are some similarities, some things are different. Naturally, growing the team, making the process more scalable, delivering the knowledge. I mean, to kind of expanding your knowledge to your partners and so on. So every process like that is something that is not trivial. It doesn't happen by itself. Sometimes you hope that something would work in a certain way and it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't progress well enough, so to find another way. And I think in a startup, it's always about focusing on what matters and making sure that it happens in the end. And if you focus on too many things, I think it's not good. I think with all the challenges of last year that I think every company felt. I mean, we see even large companies. I mean, they need to let a lot of people go and so on. I feel that for us, it was a really focusing moment. We saw what's going on in the market, and for us, focus was really the answer. Focus on what matters, focus on these objectives that we have to get. And if you focus on a finite number of things, you can actually get these things done.
Yeah. If everything goes well, what's the long-term vision for Neosec?
The API security is the new security. I mean, this is also why we call our company Neosec. It's like new security, right? So I think in the next years, the big growth in security is going to be both in cloud security. It's a super important field that we see future growth for, and also application security. They're both related to each other because the cloud security is really the infrastructure of the application. You can think about cloud security or cloud in general as the infrastructure where you build applications. So cloud security is naturally something that is growing with the use of the cloud and building of applications. And building these applications and digital transformation is really the reason for all of that. And this is really what drives all that IT transformation and growth in every digital business. So for us, we're going to continue to grow. We're going to become a larger and larger, and eventually we're going to IPO. I think this is definitely where it's going. Naturally, it's a long journey. It's not something that happens in 1 or 2 years, but this is what we're building.
Yeah. I have a few rapid fire questions for you that I'd love to hear your answers for. So just to break into it, what's particularly hard about your job?
Well, I guess the fact that it's every day something else that you need to do. I have a lot of great people on my team and of course in the company. Each person has some kind of ownership. I think that's super important, and feeling that ownership. But for me, like every day there is something else that you need to focus on and get done. And that context switch is not easy. And there's also nobody to tell me what to do. You know what I mean? But it's like I need to figure out what is really the thing that I needs to get done.
Yeah. What are your maybe tricks or something that you do as consistently as a company to continue to establish and continue to align the company around culture? How do you kind of maintain culture in a remote company?
I think it's super important to choose the right people. If you even have one person that is not the right person from a culture perspective, it doesn't have to be like a bad person that causes damage or anything like that. But if it doesn't align with the culture, it really creates some ripple effects, and it's hard. So choosing the people and making sure that we give people the right ownership. Everybody has to have the right ownership and has to execute, because this is like we can't do it all by ourselves, or we can't take all all the responsibility, let's say, of the founders or the management team, that doesn't scale. So if people have the ownership, then if they think out of the box, they can really kind of expand what we don't see.
Yeah. What's one or maybe a couple pieces of advice that you would give a founder early on in their career? Say if you were you back when you were starting LightCyber, what is one piece of advice? What's something that you know now that you wish you knew back then?
Maybe one piece of advice that luckily I didn't miss back then and also now is don't do it alone. I mean, get a good co-founder and do it together, because doing it alone is hard. I think it's much more fun than not only fun. I think it's really you get to do much more when you can do it with another co-founder. So I'm super lucky to have my co-founder, and previously my co-founder in the previous company, Michael, that is one of my best friends. And I think this is probably one of the most important things. And you only work with people that you think you're gonna like to work with over time, not just founders. I mean, don't get investors that you don't think are going to be good for you over time. It's better to decline some kind of, even something that looks like a good offer from an investor that you don't want to work with, because you'll find another investor. But once you bring somebody into the company, it's like getting married to somebody that you don't like. It's really hard to break. I think it's actually a marriage with company.
If you weren't working on Neosec, if you're working on something else, what would you be working on?
Maybe another cybersecurity startup.
Yeah.
I think that's me. I mean, this is what I know how to do.
Yeah. Last question before we obviously at the end of the episode, I always like to collect websites and LinkedIn's about Neosec. But before we get into that, whether it's early in your career or now, what books or people have influenced you the most?
Wow, great question. I think really with people, what always surprises you is these people that you didn't necessarily think are going to influence what you think. But these people that kind of either ones that grow in your company, that started from something and became something else or something super meaningful. So I think sometimes there is actually a lot to learn from things that look simple, and maybe it doesn't look like. I mean, you typically don't really learn from like the most experienced people only, right? Of course, you have a lot to learn from experienced people, but sometimes you also learn from people that don't necessarily have all the experience. And I think this is kind of, what's exciting.
Yeah. I love that. And I know we're at the end of the episode here, and Giora, it was such a pleasure chatting with you and learning not only about your space and your journey, but also about kind of the future and where technology is going and how things are shifting in focus, which I think is illuminating to the current state of technology today. But last little bit is, let us know where we can be a supporter of Neosec, where we can be a supporter of you. Give us your LinkedIn's, your websites, your Twitters, your Discord channels, wherever we can find and be a fan of the product and even start to use it if we're a company that's interested.
Yeah, so of course, our website is neosec.com. And I think everybody that develops today and APIs, especially on the case where you develop SaaS and expose your APIs and so on, I think that's something that everybody needs. Typically, I would say companies that have hundreds of employees and up, but practically everybody needs that type of visibility because that's your core service. So yeah, we would love to get in touch. You can, of course, connect me on LinkedIn. By the way, I'm happy to help other founders as much as I have time. I love to do that. But yeah, I mean, definitely if you're developing software and APIs, we would love to work together.
Amazing. Giora, thank you so much for taking the time. I hope you enjoyed yourself. And again, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you.
Of course.